Okay, so welcome everybody to our webinar this evening. We're going to talk about meeting the needs of your autistic clients for helping professionals. I'm joined by Eoin Stevens. Thanks for joining me tonight, Eoin.
How are you? Good to be here.
Good. We're going to have a good, interesting chat again. So it's informal. It's not going to be slides or anything like that. We're going to have a chat. We would absolutely love everybody here to get involved. So there's a Q&A section. You can pop a question in there, or you can comment in the chat, or join in, or ask us questions as we go. It's quite fluid. We haven't anything. Well, we have some idea of what we'll be talking about, but it's not rigid despite stereotypes. So welcome to everybody for joining, and anybody watching the recording as well. There's been a lot of interest in this, and I suppose it's a really important topic about meeting the needs of autistic clients, and realizing that autistic adults exist and there are lots of us, and it's becoming more and more common. And I suppose that's probably somewhere to start. It's like a lot of people are, think that it's rare to be autistic, but what we're finding now is more and more people are finding it in adulthood. And I suppose, instead of assuming that your clients are not autistic, maybe people need to start reframing their thinking and exploring that with their clients.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers seem to be, in and around the 1 in 50 mark at the moment. Nobody really knows where they'll settle, and that's not rare, Of course, an interesting point is that, we're increasingly seeing that, while there are many things in life that can, make people a bit more vulnerable to mental health problems. I mean, their mental health problems are more common, for instance, in the LGBTQ community than in the general population, but they're also higher in the autistic community than in the general population, which means that perhaps more than 1 in 50 clients who come for therapy, it might even be more than the average for all we know. It's a thing that I'm exploring a bit with some people in the addiction treatment world, for instance, which is quite new, it was assumed, it was hardly looked at until recently. But yeah, some people are starting to think that, again, there might be actually a quite high proportion of autistic people in the addiction recovery, addicted and in need of recovery, and in the recovery world. By the way, I'm saying that it's new territory in the addiction world. Let's emphasize here, before we dive right into it, that this is new territory anyway. Meeting the needs of autistic adults in your practice, as we've titled this, like, that's work in progress. We're all trying to explore it. We're not here to say this is everything you need to know. Here's the little booklet. This is very much a world of discovery now, for the last, certainly for me, for the last 10 years, but the next 10 years are going to be equally interesting,
And I think that's important to say, because sometimes people think it's quick, we just need to talk on neurodiversity for a couple of hours and we're all good. And it's like, no, it's actually a whole reframing of your thinking, a questioning of what you learned already, and looking at autistic people from different perspectives. It's a lot more detailed than that. And I suppose that's what we get into in our 10-day course, is that nitty gritty, where you're literally breaking down, I suppose, the different issues that we face as an autistic community. And you mentioned, our community, like any marginalized community, has very high levels of anxiety and stress and depression and trauma and addiction and things like that. And we're going to be more, I suppose there's going to be more of us turning up on the doorsteps or the clinics of psychologists and psychotherapists and other helping professionals. And it would be really interesting to see some research around that, actually. It would be great.
Yeah, and so, when we were chatting beforehand, we were saying that maybe one key starting point is just have it in your list of possibilities for every client. It doesn't have to be like that you think it's likely for every client, because the statistics don't show that either, but just, like we shouldn't be assuming that all our clients are heterosexual as a starting point, and then just finding out afterwards they're not. Or that they're, cis in terms of gender. We should just be open to the fact that people might be anything, and that they might even change in the course of 6 months of therapy. In the sense, or make discoveries, or tell us things they haven't told us. And yeah, I think we need to start just not making assumptions about the neurology of our clients, and not just assuming neurotypical unless otherwise, pushed to think otherwise. So I think that's part of the deep mind shift that needs to happen. Just being open to, yeah, let's be open to the exciting possibility that this client is neurodivergent. Could be other neurodivergence, as ADHD being perhaps the other one that we meet a lot. But yeah, autism is the main one we're talking about this evening.
And that adults can be autistic. And I know that's probably, basic stuff. Yeah. I mean, for some people here, it might actually be like, oh yeah, that you don't have to have a diagnosis, or being a diagnosis doesn't make you autistic. So you're going to have people who don't know. So like, I didn't know till I was 37. Oh, and you're 10 years into your journey now. So I'm going 8 or 9, whatever age I am now, into the journey. And I suppose sometimes there's a reluctance maybe for professionals to raise the issue that someone's autistic, because there's such stigma around being autistic. And I suppose part of the work we do is trying to break down that stigma and encourage, I suppose, everybody else to do that too. I suppose it can be difficult then as well, because we mask so much. Like, I suppose, is that something for psychotherapists to kind of be aware of, that sometimes we perform and say what we think the person wants to hear, rather than maybe having an open and honest session? Are there things that we look out for?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something that, therapists' existing training and way of seeing the world already prepares them for, because therapists are familiar with the idea that something along those lines can take place for lots of other reasons that people grow up with, and so that any client that we meet may well be quite close to the real self or quite far from the real self. And there's lots of different languages around that in different approaches. The world is full of different approaches to therapy, but like false self versus real self and things like that. Those concepts already exist in psychotherapy, and really that's what we're talking about when we talk about masking. We just mean that somebody has had to close off from the world, but often to a huge extent from themselves, their real self, and create too much of a false self. And so, yeah, that's a big piece as well that makes this frankly complex. That's why it's not something you can just learn a few bits and pieces about and then you've got a grasp of it. Like, plenty of training, but also, meeting a few clients, and working with them, and perhaps that experience, which I had a good bit of for a number of years there. I don't have it so much now, because most of the clients who come to me know they're autistic, or at least strongly thinking they are. But the experience of working with the client where, the idea of being autistic hasn't been mentioned at any point or hinted at, and the wondering begins to happen. So you possibly on the therapist side, possibly the client eventually mentions that they've been reading about it, but you've already got to know the client without this being part of the agenda. And then it's interesting, the whole sort of shift that you need to do around okay, so how does that fit? But also, how did they not know it fitted? How did we not know it fitted? How was it not sort of more obvious? And that's a fascinating process. And then helping them move through the masking. I mean, that's a huge piece of a therapist's work. So yeah, you've got to understand that we're dealing nowadays with late discovery autistic adults.
Yeah.
Now, maybe in 30 years' time, lots of autistic adults won't be late discovery, they'll be early discovery, and they've known since they were young. But this is the big population for therapy work for the next good while, is late discovery, masked autistic adults.
Yes, who are full of trauma, basically.
That's the next layer, isn't it? Yeah, is huge lot of trauma. By the way, on that note, when we're providing training, people sometimes ask about distinguishing between you know, a traumatized person and an autistic person. And I'm not going to go into this in detail now without slides to help me, but my sense is that if you really know what it is to be autistic and you have the proper sort of mental checklist in your head, it doesn't actually match the traumatized person checklist closely at all. So a lot of that question, with all due respect, comes from, I think, just insufficient clarity about what it is to be autistic. Now, autistic people can be very traumatized, but distinguishing between the two, a traumatized person who isn't autistic and an autistic person who's not that traumatized, and somebody who's both, like, you know, yes, somebody could be quiet and anxious, you know, but I mean, anxious is not a feature of autism. It's just something that generally goes with it. And quiet, well, why would we jump to any conclusions about that anyway? There's a million reasons why somebody might be not very forthcoming. Yes, being traumatized is one of them.
Yeah.
Autistic is one of them. Being introverted is one of them.
Yeah.
Not being very taken by you and thinking they're going to go and see another therapist might be one of them. You know, millions of things. So, you know, it's a fair question, but actually, I think you know, a decent bit of learning helps clarify that question.
Yeah, and I suppose that's it. People are still thinking autism is the way it's defined in the DSM or, you know, ADOS or whatever, these, you know, criteria, that it's, you know, people who are poor social communication, who you know, lack empathy. Maybe it's a woman, so they can't be autistic because girls aren't autistic really, only a couple, you know, there's all of this kind of, people still, I suppose, people still work out very outdated. Even though the DSM has just been updated, it's still outdated. And I suppose I say, well, autism is called, our trauma, autistic people's trauma is called autism in the DSM. So literally, it's kind of a thing we say. We don't really know what an untraumatized autistic person looks like, but what you do know when you break down through the criteria and you take away what we know already is human responses to trauma and stress and anxiety, what you're left with is a bunch of very sensitive people, you know. And I suppose that's just a very simplistic, I suppose, explanation of what you were talking about, Owen. And it's like, how can you tell, you know, one from the other? And it's like, well, also, if someone, you know, is identifying with autistic experiences, a lot of the time it's the trauma of being autistic in a world that doesn't accept us, doesn't understand us, pathologizes everything we do, you know, and it's how we respond to that. So it's a really good question, because I suppose a lot of people are misdiagnosed then with like BPD and different things and told it's trauma or CPTSD, and then they don't find out they're autistic. And I suppose to be clear, you know, when we talk about being autistic, we're not talking about like it being a mental disorder or a mental health condition or anything like that. I suppose we talk about autistic culture and, you know, autistic community and a marginalized community. And basically we're just people who've been pathologized for a long time, and everyone kind of is conditioned into thinking there's one way to communicate, there's one way to think. Well, obviously there's not. There's tons of variations in our world.
Well, I think, just since you're touching on communication there, I think it was one of the things I most wanted to say something about this evening, because, you know, again, you know, we're talking about a subculture that's, you know, largely unaware of itself as a subculture so far. So, you know, we're back in sort of the 70s in relation to the LGBTQ community, you know, and again, I think it's, you know, in responding to that notion of, you know, what's involved in meeting the needs of autistic adults in therapy work, I think having that touch of a political mindset, it doesn't mean you have to be an advocate or that you know, have to go on a soapbox, but still thinking that there's a political dimension to this, just like there is to the whole, you know, LGBTQ, you know, subculture questions. You know, there's still lots of questions and lots of difficulties and lots of things that aren't right, you know. So we're dealing with that with autistic people as well, for a long time yet. But therefore, I think, you know, if we take that kind of subculture notion, I think a good tip for therapists is often think a bit similarly like you would if you're working with a client for a very different culture from yours, which is increasingly the case in Ireland. We might be doing that, actually. But then communication is the big issue.
Yeah.
I mean, immediately, if we're dealing with somebody from an unfamiliar country with, like let's leave out language issues. Let's assume they speak English, but a very different religious background, perhaps, things like that. Immediately, what we'll think of is, I'm going to have to learn how to communicate with this person, and I'll have to learn how to adjust my communication. I mean, they'll probably need to learn to adjust a bit, but I'll also need to learn to adjust. To me, that's actually, if I was to maybe give one take-home point for this evening, I'd say that's immediately have that question in your mind. Now, we try and do that with every client to some extent, but there can be a lot of unquestioned assumptions, exactly as you said there, about sort of communication that's so normal we don't even think that it's just a way of communicating. It isn't necessarily the way everyone communicates. And obviously, it can be a little more obvious with somebody we know is from a different culture, and they're not, but when it's somebody who's from just down the road, then we may not go that direction. But with an autistic client, you have to open that side of yourself up, the side of yourself that starts thinking, okay, I can take a lot less for granted. I may need to adjust my communication style. I may simply need to ask, what that means to them, what works for them, what doesn't. And I may need to get a lot more explained to me about their communication style. Like one of the classic examples, not assuming that the fact that they're not making eye contact with you, not assuming that means something, like that they're, avoidant or anxious or anything. It just means they're not looking at you,
Yeah,
for a lot of autistic people, what it actually means is they're thinking, certainly for me, and a lot of my clients have said that to me, and we do that a lot of the time, me and autistic clients. One of us says something to the other, and then the other is thinking about a response, and we look away, and then we start giving the response while we're looking away, and then we start to look back, and that sort of stuff. Like that, to me, is one of the really crucial bits, is get to know about that, do training, read books, look at videos, whatever you need to learn a bit more about this kind of different, and it's variable across autistic clients, but about some of these possible differences, facial expression, things like that, and then drop your assumptions and start learning from the client. That in itself will do a world of good to an adult autistic client.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of our issues come from people not accepting us socially and not understanding the way we communicate. A lot, right?
Huge amount.
Come from that. So to find somebody who has gone to the trouble of, I suppose, educating themselves, makes us feel at ease, more comfortable. Also, it's really important to learn about autistic communication from autistic people, not on charity websites or social skills training or any of that kind of stuff, because what's out there is awful. Again, kind of about, they don't make eye contact. It's all deficit based. It hasn't an actual understanding of how autistics communicate. And a lot of these people have never seen autistics in the wild communicating with each other.
There you go. Autistics in the wild. That's a great name for a workshop. But yeah, I mean, it's variable at best what's out there. By the way, here I came across a great quote from Pete Hornby, his recent book on special interests. What I want to talk about or something is called, isn't it? I don't know if you've seen it. Yeah, it's very good. It's very good. He says autism is all about communication. Well, to be clearer, difficulties of communication, failed communication, such as taking a joke seriously, taking a deadly serious utterance as a joke, missing sarcasm, taking banter personally, misinterpreting instructions or expectations. These things leave us battered and emotionally bruised, which can lead to a gradual shutting out of the social world. So I think, what we're saying here is, at least if for a start, an adult autistic client has a different experience of attempts to communicate. You don't have to get it right. I mean, again, this is what we're trained as therapists to know anyway. It's not like you don't have to get it perfectly right. You have to show willing and then learn, and that's a massively healing experience for a lot of autistic adults to start with.
Absolutely. And I suppose just to be aware as well, so many of us lack confidence. We're not used to talking about ourselves because we just haven't had that opportunity or that space growing up. And, it's new, to kind of have someone who is making space for us, to be heard. And it can take time sometimes for people to open up. And obviously that's, I suppose the same with lots of people coming to therapy, but, big confidence around social things. And I suppose even just to give even 2 tips on communication, as you were saying, like eye contact, don't be reading into it. It just means the person's not looking at you. And I love it. And it's like, that's actually what it just means. And people often read into our communication and come to the wrong conclusions. But, asking vague questions, like that's just, we need specifics, so kind of, having, just to use your language that's quite specific. And avoid things like, well, what do we think about this? When you mean, what do you think about this? This kind of way people use language, and that's really confusing for an autistic person, because then we're trying to figure out what we think, which is you and me, whereas the question is actually, what do I think? It's just that kind of use of language, that kind of vague language, or language that can be misinterpreted. And I suppose just as well to realize that we communicate very directly most of the time. It's not like we can't use colloquialisms. I know it's not raining cats and dogs when someone says that, but just that directness. And I suppose we're
straightness. I think straight talking.
Yeah.
I think that the communication one that I just talked about, that's a should. That's what you should do. The straightness, that's another interesting point. Another thing I've really discovered in the last couple of years that I've been working primarily with autistic adults. And this isn't so much a should, but you might find this an interesting thing to be aware of, and really just go a little more for it than you might with non-autistic clients. And that is, that autistic clients generally appreciate just straight talking, So rather than kind of wait too long to say things, or, kind of say them in a very softened way, or, or not ask a question that you think you might be useful to know the answer, but it's a little bit delicate or something. To be honest, I found most autistic clients just want to get on with the job, They're not that they think it's going to be easy, but they just want to get on with it. And if they don't, they'll say as well, also, I don't want to talk about that, I few clients at the moment who do that. They just say, actually, I want to stop now, as in, don't talk about that anymore. Can we go to something else? Very straight, So I think, like I'm offering you that as a thing to kind of, experiment a bit more with, just be straighter and see what happens. And generally it's welcome, and it's what you'll get back. And you get a very, very straight conversation going, and lots of work will get done,
And so that's it, because some people are, sometimes, people are taught to dance around the subject, and it actually doesn't work like that for autistics. We want go straight in there. We spend enough for trying to figure out what people mean. We need our therapists to be direct, I suppose, and to get to the point and get in there, with the work. Joanna.
And I also wanted to pick up on your point about, again, around the kind of concreteness, not just the straightness, but the, saying things in a less vague and, implicatory and, a more concrete and specific kind of way. It's just that Joanna in the chat is saying, I wish more therapists knew how to help us connect with our bodies and help us understand how we feel. And, I think that is work, again, that, therapists, at least in theory, are trained in, but maybe aren't so into in some cases. Some are very into it. But that kind of, like a question like, how do you feel, is a very difficult question for a lot of people. It's fine for some people, but definitely very difficult for a lot of autistic people. Learning how to identify feelings is something that mostly comes from something I talked about when we did the fundraiser for Ukrainian autistic people, the idea of mirroring. In other words, you know how you feel because somebody mirrors it back to you. They look at the expression on your face, or the fact that you're stamping your feet when you're 4 years old, and they say, are you cross? Are you angry? Or if you look a bit sheepish, they say, did you do something wrong? Are you feeling a bit guilty? The problem is that people with the best will in the world find it very hard to interpret autistic people's feelings, and so they don't mirror them back very well.
Yeah.
So I think autistic people often don't know how we feel. And I agree with Joanna. I think a very good starting point is things like, well, where is it in your body? Like even a bit of training, like, teaching, like, anxious tends to feel like butterflies in the tummy, whereas guilt feels more like something weighing you down or whatever, so stuff like that is a good tip, all right,
Yeah. And I mean, like, I suppose just, lots of us have issues identifying our feelings because we've dismissed our own feelings for so long, because that's what we've been taught to do, or other people like that. If you say that, if a child is staring out the window, they're told they're not listening. or not paying attention when they are, and then it's, you know what I mean? So we do, not only do we not get our mirrored, we get, negative responses to just normal things that we're doing, and told that we're negative. So Lucy's saying, I always struggle to begin a therapy session. The therapist might ask how I am. Yeah, which is a vague question as well, which I can never answer. Or do they wait for me to start? Oh, right now.
Yeah. Well,
there was more to that, sorry, which I can't do either. DBT therapy sessions helped me as I handed over a diary card, and that would start the session. That's really good.
yeah. And I suppose I've been a bit, of the type of therapist who manage sessions, help clients manage sessions anyway, before I knew I was working with autistic clients, or before I knew I was autistic. But then I'm probably like that because I'm autistic. I like a little bit of structure, and so I would have a tendency anyway to say something, unless a client comes in and dives straight into stuff. And I think this does serve me well with autistic clients. I'm more the type who'll say something like, I might say, how was your week? Just to see if there's particular things have happened they want to talk about. But other than that, I'd kind of say, so last time we were talking about this, and this. So in other words, I'll do the links for them, and I'll tie it up a little bit and offer them did you want to come back to that or that, or and I think, again, particularly for autistic clients, often that's very welcome.
Yeah.
It's hard to just start from a standing start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not the way a lot of processes work for us in life. We generally like a bit of a map and a bit of something to work on, and so why would that not be true in therapy as well? It's like, what are we working on today? It doesn't have to be like that all the time.
We don't often get to decide the map. That's the problem too. So
this is a good point. Yes. Yeah.
Not used to kind of having that freedom, which is a terrible thing to say, but it's true. And I suppose it has its repercussions. Sarah's saying, I'm a late diagnosed autistic. Congratulations. And I'm sure I'm ADHD also. Yeah, I think there's 30, they reckon 30 to 40% of us are also ADHD.
Could be 50, some say.
It's very hard to tell where one starts and the other begins, to be honest. I'm also a trained mental health nurse and CBT therapist. I work with 15 clients a week in the NHS service. I'm about 50%, if not more, I'm sure 50%, if not more.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I'm open in my service that I'm autistic and want to change how we are approaching our clients and raise awareness. I'm starting by working on a presentation. Well, good for you. Because many therapists don't really have a clue, not their fault, zero training. But that's the thing. I mean, like, Owen and myself started the course last October, the 10-day practitioner course, because there is nothing there. And because, there's literally so many autistic clients, and there's people are going, I mean, we're involved in the autistic community, and, you hear the stories of people who are going into mental health services and being re-traumatized, or, people not picking up they're autistic, people not believing they're autistic, wrong approaches, all of the stuff, communication, all the things that we're talking about. And it's just that, as Owen said, like, this is a large segment of client base for mental health professionals, and I suppose people need to know how to meet us and meet our needs and serve us. People, that's the word I use, but that's what we're doing. Do we all serve each other? That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, well, therapists, we definitely serve our clients. We might not use that exact word a lot of the time, but like they're employing us. We're they're the customer. Somebody put a comment in the Q&A saying, in regards to working with autistic clients, is it a matter of having the awareness of the potential that a client could be autistic? Well, yes, for a start, and could be ADHD and various other things. Like, we have an awareness that somebody could be, an abuse victim, whether they've mentioned or not. We have it there as one of the possibilities that somebody could be, or that they could be anything on the rainbow spectrum of LGBTQ. So certainly awareness of the potential that they could be, and not having expectations, yes, and being accepting of communication styles. First of all, in general, why wouldn't we be? But I suppose the extra then piece that I'd be saying is that certainly once we know a client is autistic, we then, are trying to figure out how this particular individual needs to communicate, and we need to communicate with them, obviously, by experimenting and talking with them about them and asking them. But we can also educate ourselves in general about autistic communication, because there is overlap. Like, everybody's different, but there wouldn't be a word autistic if there wasn't overlap. So, like a couple of the examples we've just given, we can start by saying, well, at least, maybe I might, ask the person, what does it mean for them, if anything, when they don't make eye contact? So we just know, and we can just then forget about it, or I know how to interpret it, and if they say, well, it does mean I'm feeling uncomfortable sometimes, I can check with you. And if they say, to be honest, never really means anything very much, except it's what I do when I'm thinking, then we know that.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Rachel is saying hypermobility is sometimes missed. This conference discussed the link 7 times more likely to have ASD, or to be autistic would be the language we use, and 5 more times likely to have ADHD of hypermobility. Yeah, I think that might be old figures. It used to be 7 times. No, we're twice more likely to have EDS. So I don't know how that happened, but I think it's fair to say that autistic people are more likely than the general population to have Ehlers-Danlos syndromes, which is anything from hypermobility, to chronic.
The other way around, though, I think Rachel might be saying it's that if you have hypermobility, you're 7 times more likely to be autistic, rather than if you're autistic.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's
5
times more likely to have ADHD. Oh yeah, okay, it's the other way around. Okay, that makes more sense.
A statistic in the other direction. Yeah.
Okay, that's what it is. Yeah. So we are more likely.
So that's fascinating. That's amazing. Yeah. So there are certain populations. I mean, I don't know the statistics, but I do know that current research is suggesting that in the eating disorder populations, particularly anorexic, autism seems to be very high, very high. So again, particularly if you're working a lot with eating disorders, then particularly it's really worth thinking, well, let's just hold the possibility that the person is autistic there and see where that takes us. Start off in your head, and then if it seems useful, start talking about it at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to see someone. I know there's kind of some research out there on anorexia and eating disorders, but like as a kind of extreme masking, that's how I'd like to see someone maybe look into that, but because it's obviously related. Common things like Joanna's saying, common things like aphantasia are missed too. Yeah, always good for therapists to know, because the therapists say, visualize this. And then the person who doesn't visualize anything.
Yeah. And another interesting one that just occurs to me is the whole kind of, spontaneity kind of thing, because again, kind of lack of let's give this a go is sometimes interpreted as some sort of resistance or even traumatized state or something. But a lot of autistic people just like to more have a reason for something and a little bit of planning go into it, rather than, well, let's just do it. No, but why? And again, I think that can be over-interpreted as too serious or something. But it's not for autistic people. See, this is the thing, is that a lot, you talked earlier about the old ideas of DSM version of autism and so on. Like, an awful lot of that is behaviorally focused as well.
Yeah.
So what you need to know, what you need to have some grasp of, and it takes a while to get it, you have to study and work and meet autistic people and ask them. You could ask them what's going on inside, and find out what it's like inside, because that's primarily what being autistic is. It's a different way of processing the world, and how that shows its behavior. It's not a list of behavioral habits, So again, even less eye contact is a very trivialized way of kind of learning about autism. It's like,
oh God,
it's just for a therapist, it's just don't make assumptions about eye contact, because you don't know what's going on inside.
Also, eye contact is very different across different cultures. You know what I mean? Again,
of course,
there's not one rule. Anyway, half the stuff that's written about eye contact, people don't actually like look at each other like this. It's really uncomfortable when people do it. It's more fleeting than necessary, or than continuous, and then you have people be teaching autistics to make eye contact, and then it's just uncomfortable for everybody. So,
uncomfortable for everybody. Yeah,
everybody, because you
I
end up
know.
staring. Alice is saying that she started working with autistic clients recently as a life coach. Their honesty and practicality is so welcome. Yeah, imagine
Yeah,
if everybody welcomed our honesty and practicality, we'd be happy.
yeah,
We'd have a great
yeah,
time.
yeah.
And seeing great results because of their natural ability to talk
I
straight.
love that in
Yeah.
therapy. I really do. I'm having a great time with that in the last couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah, but it is, I suppose it's just once we open up, I think that's it. Like we're pretty straightforward, say what we mean. They're also helping me to communicate more clearly, a win-win, which is great. Fantastic. And it helps me that I'm a mother of a young autistic man. He's taught me so much. And that's it.
That's lovely. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
lovely.
Yeah. And I mean, like, that's it when people actually are willing to learn from autistics, but that's still such a strange concept for some people, that we could actually learn from these poor people with this terrible thing called autism that affects the way we communicate somehow magically. Alice is, someone else is saying, be a bit careful though of expecting all your autistic clients to be more likely to follow through with the plan. We aren't all that way. Some like me don't like planning and have trouble with follow through. What you said was great though. Yeah, and I mean, look, not every autistic person likes plans, and lots of us who are ADHD as well may find that stressful. Demand avoidant people might be like, I don't want to have a plan, so it does not like, and that's really important, isn't it? No, it's not one size fits all, because
No, no,
yeah,
no. Anyway, I think, yeah, the reality of therapy and of the whole world is that, how good are most people at following through with a plan when the plan is in relation to some difficult change in your life. But I suppose, yeah, it's therefore it's still always about finding the right plan at the right time, when the person's ready, and if it suits, and you experiment, and if it doesn't work, you drop it for the moment, and so on. Still, I think a lot of autistic people are reassured that to at least be thinking that way, to be thinking in terms of a bit of a map and a bit of a sense of structure and routine. I mean, the good old term executive functioning difficulties is thrown around a lot. I think it's a bit vague, to be honest, because there can be a million different things underlying it, just like any of the other things we talked about. But yeah, it's not my favorite terminology, but yes, of course, it's real. It can be really hard to keep up change, to keep up a plan, for a whole host of reasons. And it's absolutely true that that's present in autistic people as well. But I think exploring the reasons then is the good thing to do there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Sarah's saying OCD, social anxiety clients, not all of them, but I think should be screened
I
for
agree. I
autism.
agree.
We were saying that earlier. I
Yeah.
mean, like,
Yeah.
I think addiction, EDS, as someone mentioned earlier, epilepsy, like
Yeah.
social anxiety. I mean, yeah, rough figures are 80% of autistics have anxiety disorders, 60% depression, 36% PTSD, in and around there. So it's like, if you have someone who's experiencing any of those things, yeah, we should be looking that maybe they're autistic. And I suppose it's just to be very clear, we are not saying that being autistic causes anxiety, stress, depression, or trauma. Just to be really, really clear on that, it's just.
Well, I mean, Luke Bearden, who's the lead of the postgraduate autism studies course in Sheffield Hallam University, and a good author, if you want to read some good books on this area.
One is just out today, or well, I got it today, or yes, the child.
Yeah, the new one. Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but he's got a good one on anxiety. But one of the things he's well known for is his formula: autism plus environment equals outcome, which I think, again, for therapists is, again, another useful tip, because we think that way anyway. Therapists think in terms of, there's a basic given genetic personality, and then it's the life experiences after that lead to the outcome we meet. But that's very true, again, for autistic people. It's not, people aren't anxious because they're autistic. They're anxious because it's really difficult to be autistic in a world that's difficult for autistic people. So of course it's common, but it's not a feature of autism.
No, and you see, we have that kind of thinking that, autistic people are anxious, autism causes that, autistic people are stressed, oh, autism causes that, which I just call lazy psychology. And then I use the example of autistic people get hungry. Does autism cause that too? Like, that's the thinking, you know what I mean? So it's like, how ridiculous does this get? So it's just really important, I suppose, that we do experience these things, but we're experiencing these things because of the environment. Like you mentioned in Bearden's formula, the environment is not good to us. You know, I mean, if you look at the minority stress model and apply that to autistics, you'll see exactly why. You know, people who are pathologized and oppressed and denied their rights often have these negative experiences. And I suppose, so Lucy's saying, psychiatrists constantly talk to me about anxiety. They kept telling me that I must be afraid of being judged when socializing. Yeah, see, I would say no, I just don't like most social situations. They never got it.
I'd love to come back. I wanted to come back to social anxiety anyway, which was mentioned a few minutes ago, because I think that's spot on. Like, I mean, an autistic person can learn to fear judgment in social situations, in which case they have got, some classic social anxiety as well. But a lot of autistic people find social situations difficult for a whole host of other reasons, not necessarily because they fear being judged, but because they find them exhausting. Because they find them sensorily difficult from a sensory point of view, and of course sometimes top of the list because they're not interested, but they're under pressure to be in those social situations, so it emerges as a problem. In other words, they don't want to go to some social situation that people think they should go to, but they're just not that motivated. It doesn't give them any reward. Even if an autistic person does develop full-blown social anxiety, I think you need to take those things into account. So that's another kind of, angle on the, how do we, meet the needs of autistic adults in our practices. A whole lot can be said about specific issues like social anxiety. Don't assume that all the difficulty is social anxiety, even if some of it is, as Lucy is saying, some of it can be, as I said, sensory difficulties, running out of spoons, pure lack of interest, but also, there's a tendency sometimes in social anxiety work to assume that recovery will lead to wanting to be in lots of normal social situations. Now you will want to go into the staff room and chat with everybody at the tea break. Now you'll definitely want to go to the staff Christmas party, but no, people might or might not, and autistic people definitely might or might not. So social anxiety is a lovely example again of how we need to simply take the fact that the client is autistic into account in doing the work.
And
make less assumptions.
On that note, because I was talking to someone who's currently in our course that's running at the moment about this kind of idea of autistic people and running, because a lot of therapists work one-to-one, but there's such a huge opening there for people to facilitate groups, because autistic people talking with other autistic people is a very different experience to non-autistic people talking to autistic people, and that kind of support is really invaluable. And I suppose as therapists, maybe to open up ideas to maybe working with groups, or even just facilitating that kind of way of socializing for people, because there aren't a lot of safe spaces, there aren't opportunities for autistic people to meet and all of that. So that's something else. And obviously that helps, you know what I mean? If you find a group you belong to, well, I mean,
I'm a big fan of that. I think that's a wonderfully supportive, de-shaming, practically, helpful, and I love this bit, politically subversive thing to do. In other words, let's get more autistic people meeting more autistic people, just like as I said with the LGBTQ world, if people need to get together and discover other people that have similarities, and that's what's going to grow the kind of groundswell of movement, because this is a cultural issue. This isn't just a professional issue or a therapy issue. It's a cultural issue.
No, I mean, there's a rights movement, and that's it.
Totally.
It's a rights movement, and I suppose part of it is trying to make sure that autistic people are getting our needs met in different ways, which is what we do at AUsome Training, and try and educate people from all the different aspects. Caroline is saying assessments are prohibitively expensive for many adults, which they are, and generally the process does not seem readily available through public adult mental health services. No, and also then there are people who go for diagnosis diagnosis and then are re-traumatized or told they're not autistic. They have an obsession with being autistic because people doing the diagnosis are relying on outdated ideas that, oh, you've got children or empathy, you can't be autistic. If more individuals could be correctly diagnosed, then it would clarify the use of specific therapeutic approaches and remove the tentative hypothetical nature of a therapist discovering ASD traits. I suppose I'll take a little bit of that if you don't mind, Eoin, and then I'll let you jump in.
Yeah.
And I suppose, yes, people do need to be identified. I suppose, do people need to be diagnosed? Because it's like, really normal now for people to identify with, I'm autistic. Why would I need to go to somebody who read some books and did a course, albeit 3 or 4 years in college, to tell me that I'm autistic? We can know we're autistic. I suppose we just need access to that information. So again, it's kind of like, we're in the, as Eoin was saying, kind of like where the gay community was in the 70s or 60s, maybe that's where we're at now. So you had to be diagnosed as, with sexual deviancy back then, but that wasn't the route for that community. It's also not the route for our community. People need to be able to identify with what autistic means and that as well. So I suppose it's a whole different discussion about whether there's a need for diagnosis. It's always a really interesting question, though, because of course we're oppressed by our system. So our system is set up. So some people need a diagnosis in order to get benefits or whatever. So, but that's systematic oppression. That's just literally how the system is set up. So I suppose that's kind of, I think if people need to get a diagnosis because they feel like it's beneficial for them, go for it. But I think it's important to kind of also recognize that we don't need someone else to tell us we're autistic. Basically.
And you can't get diagnosed as autistic. You can only get diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, because the diagnosis means something medical is there, and autism isn't medical. Autism spectrum disorder, if such a thing exists, is medical. Now, I think it's going to be a mixed approach for the moment. I think we are going to have both, and it does benefit some people to get get assessed and diagnosed, sometimes for practical reasons, like getting some allowances made in their how they sit exams in college, or get information fed to them, or get some sort of accommodations made at work. And some people do feel the need somehow for that official authority to tell them. I think it needs to be mixed up, because we need to make much more allowance, I think, for self-identification, but for practical reasons it'll be both going forward.
I don't know, talk to me for a couple of hours, I'm like, yeah, you're definitely autistic. I tell loads of people. I'm always like, people, how do we tell people? And I'm like, I don't know, I just bring it up all the time with people. And again, it's not a bad thing. So that whole diagnosis thing, it's such an interesting talk. I suppose something I'm actually trying to put together at the moment for our website is like, how do I know I'm autistic, outside of the medical model and that, because I suppose lots of us look up stuff, and I kept coming across all this childhood boys lists and things, and eventually I came across autistic women and people's stories, and I suppose I was like, oh, this makes way more sense. So I wanted to write something that's outside of the medical model, and I suppose more about what we talk about when we talk about being autistic. So maybe, we have some autistic people here, so jump in, tell us so that therapists might be able to identify that if someone is autistic, okay, so someone has here, best way to figure out if we're autistic: read, listen to autistic people's experience and talk to autistic people. Well, yeah, that's it.
And two of the things that I would throw in, because I wanted to mention them anyway, in terms of meeting the needs of our autistic clients. One of them is that we should take sensory needs into consideration. And ask, and certainly be open to, whether we can help further. Now, a lot of therapy settings can be fairly sensory friendly, but we don't know what will be friendly or otherwise to any client, but particularly autistic people. And the reason I'm mentioning it now as well is because I think a lot of people still have in their heads, when they think of being autistic, they immediately just think of some of the communication stuff that I talked about earlier, but it's seen as kind of social oddities. In other words, that's what they think of, somebody who's socially odd. And I quite like the idea that I'm socially odd, so that's fine. We can go with that one, you know. In fact, I'm embracing it even more and more these days. But like there's a whole. This isn't emphasized enough in the DSM, for instance, at all, and that is the sensory piece. The sensory piece is a piece in its own right. It's big, it's variable, it's not the same for all autistic people, and it's not necessarily negative. Like, don't be assuming that sensory sensitivity means that you just find bright lights difficult. It could mean that you're very sensitive to the different flavors in foods and you're a chef, you know, or that you're very sensitive to colors and you're an artist or a lover of art, you know. Like, it's not as simple as people think. So that's another deep dive one, is the whole sensory piece. So part of what we need to be aware of if we're trying to help somebody maybe in their self-discovery. And since I'm talking about deep dives, the other one is what's loosely called special interests, but like it's like deep, intense passion and enthusiasm and joy in certain activities. You know, special interest is a very weak way of describing this aspect. Or what is it? Restricted and fixated interests, I think it says in the DSM. You know, come on, folks. Like, you don't understand autistic people if you don't understand this side of us, and you don't understand your autistic client if you don't understand some of the passion that they have around some things in their life. And if you don't know what they are, then yeah, there's something missing. It's like missing a major relationship in their life that you don't know about. So ask them, you know, or if you're asking if somebody is exploring with you whether they might be autistic, yeah, look in that area as well. And it could be their job, or it could be a hobby, or it could be something that doesn't neatly fall into any of those categories. But they will have that. It's again the inside, not the outside. It's not that there's a special interest thing on the outside. It's that we have the kind of mind that goes deeply into things, deeply and joyfully and passionately, and full of wonder. You know, this is one of my favorite at the moment. Special interests are one of my special interests. So that was before Pete Hornby's book, but he's got me even more down that track. It's just very underestimated in how big it is. The monotropic theory really focuses on that a lot, you know, and rightly, you know. So yeah, there's so much in answering the question that we're looking at this evening. There's so much, you know. So what are people putting in the? That's my rant. What are people in the holiday snaps, shops, signs, and textures? Yeah.
But I mean, like, you know, we do stuff that other people find odd. So, you know, they're the hints. It's like constantly defending what you like and hiding the things that make you excited and your interest. And like, you know, when you were saying we have these minds that, you know, love getting into detail and bring us joy. And it's like, yeah, we're emotional. Like, we're really intensely emotional people, despite stereotypes, or trauma responsive, where people do shut down, you know, and it's like, special interests are just, you know, it's when someone gets, you look what I'm talking about, especially my hands are, you know, you can see the emotion.
That's it. And yeah.
Autistic people light up talking about their special interests. Many of us end up working in it. And I suppose, you know, in our interests. And another thing I suppose about autistics, that's kind of an obvious thing, is our, what we call like spiky profiles. Like, we just seem to be good at like lots of different things, like, or have lots of different, not good at, but, you know, have lots of different interests in different things. It's not so much like we fit into the box, you know, that you study these subjects, you go do this course, and then this is your job because this is your interest. You know, we kind of just really kind of different interests that seem totally unrelated to people. You know, and that's a big sign, I think, for us as well, that just this kind of
absolutely
things that make us very excited and we're very passionate about.
Yes, that's a good point of describing it. Just, you know, find out what a client is excited about, which is a pretty good thing to do anyway. But you know, if you know, if a client who's autistic and probably traumatized and masked trusts you enough, because it'll require this, they will show a lot of their real excitement about some things that they're into in their lives, because they've learned to mask that as well, because it's seen as childlike, and childlike in an adult is not seen as generally a positive term, you know, childish even, you know. So if you see that, what I think wonderful childlike, full of wonder sort of enthusiasm, then it is another
and why is that childlike? why is wonder and joy a childlike thing?
I know. Extraordinary. Yeah. There you go. There you go.
I find it kind of like when autistics start talking about autistic joy and our interests, it's like, this is kind of sad that we're explaining to people that you can actually, experience this level of joy from an interest. Like, why don't other people experience this? Why not?
And sometimes that joy even comes out as the stim, which is again another area that you've got to know something about if you're to understand this whole territory and the variability of it and the different meanings of it and purposes and functions of physical movement, which is all it is. I mean, dance for joy, that's a stim.
Yeah. So snapping your hands in excitement. There's loads of it. And yeah, I mean, looking into autistic body language and that is really interesting as well, and telling how people feel. And I suppose it's kind of why you're as an autistic professional or therapist, you can read your clients so well, but it also doesn't mean that you have to be autistic in order to work with autistic clients. I mean, it's just a bit of decoding. It's like, we're all human. We've got some slight differences. Same as the one we're talking about in the beginning, understanding a different culture, learning a little bit how to communicate with this person, and I suppose that's what's important, is that people actually do start kind of meeting each other and talking about these things. Caroline is saying, they're really good points, Evaleen and Eoin, and thank you. Self-identification is very relevant and validating for an individual. However, the medical profession has over-reliance on the DSM above all else.
That's the reality.
Problem rather than the solutions. I like the idea of autistic people finding their collective voice. Thanks a million. And you know what? It's just, we're in this transition phase anyway. So
that's it.
Overlap, but eventually it will just be, oh, I'm autistic, people are autistic. I'd imagine like there's teenagers and stuff who are self-identifying already because
totally.
Like we're not even in that zone. But
and they don't necessarily ever come to a therapist. Like we don't have to assume either that everybody who's autistic then does develop sufficient mental health problems that they go to a therapist, nor does everyone who develops mental health problems go to a therapist. Sometimes they get help elsewhere, from friends and from support groups and things like that. And so we're talking from a therapy point of view because that's what we're talking about this evening. But like there just shouldn't be so much overlap really in the end between the two. Autistic people should just be able to get on with being autistic people, and if they need to go to a therapist, they go to a therapist. But for the moment, we have this, undiscovered, masked, late discovery making adult population, and many of those people do need to go to therapy because it's been a rough ride, very rough ride.
Absolutely, and that's it. I think people need to realize how rough that ride is for us all, and I suppose that is, we talk a lot about that in our 10-day course, which we're halfway through our first one, and I've been talking to some of the participants so far, and just getting that feedback that people didn't, I suppose, realize how many of their clients could be autistic, how to, recognize that the overlap with these things like addiction and eating disorders, and how we should be having our open mind that clients can be autistic. So for anyone who's interested, I'm going to just post a link again in the chat, and we'll send it out again. Our next course, we have some places left on it, is starting in January, and it's 10 days, and we have all of our facilitators are autistic. So Eoin is one on the course, so am I. We have Mackie, we have Jude Morrow, and we have one or two other people as well. So if you're interested, don't wait, I'd say, because it is almost full now at this stage. But it's, I suppose, picking up, we touched on a lot of different topics here tonight, but it's getting our teeth into those and digging into them and really explaining them, and I suppose seeing how people can adapt their practice a bit, because that's the thing, it does take it does mean adapting. First of all, it means a mindset change, and that can be a shift for a lot of people, and then after that it's kind of how you change your practice, or how you make it neuro-affirming. I suppose that's the buzzword at the moment, is like how you make something neuro-affirming, and how you can make, so one was talking about like your sensory environment and all of that, accessible for your autistic clients, how you actually communicate with them, and I suppose how far we can change things. And I suppose we look at lots of different things like current knowledge. Owen, someone said to me today, I don't think they ever got so many resources. Owen's list of resources that goes out after each day is like this long. It'll probably take me years.
It's a list of resources from an autistic person who has been collecting resources for a long time and believes that information should be spread as far as possible and as freely as possible. So,
sharing the
absolutely.
information. So if you're looking for
Autistic philosophy.
you'll get lots of that. But also, you know, there's like workshops on stimming and I suppose applying what you're learning as well. And we do look at co-occurring conditions like EDS and dyspraxia and ADHD, and well, conditions, let's just say co-occurring things, and looking at, I suppose, how you know, structure your environment, your therapy, and really start developing a person-centered, an autistic person-centered goal. Do you know what I mean? So I mean, someone saying, can you share the list of resources here? I'm like, it's literally,
well, it's not just a list as such. It's lots of resources, like lots of PDF documents and articles and things like that. And straight answer is not all of them without doing the course. But you know, I have a fair few resources like on my website. Now that's not the Awesome Training website. It's I can put it down. It's autisminformedtherapy.com. Yeah,
I'll put it in the chat there. So yeah, we do have a good bit of
there's a resources page there, and you know, again, I've shared quite a few links to interesting places as there is on the Awesome Training website as well. But also, there is a link to a Dropbox folder with a selection of some of the materials, a taster of the kind of materials that you get more of if you come on the course.
So I put the link there. So it's Autism Informed Therapy for Owen. Owen, you're not taking any clients because you're full.
Well, no, very little. I've got a waiting list, permanent waiting list. You know, yes, it's useful for autistic practitioners. Well, yes, extremely. Certification that can be shared. You will receive a certificate, and you know, we're looking at having because people like me are extremely busy, overly busy, big waiting list, turning people down. We want to have a list of people who've done our course that we can then refer to if somebody's looking for somebody who is neurodiversity informed and affirming and autism informed and possibly autistic. If clients have a preference for an autistic practitioner, then we'll certainly also have that information, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's an important point, is that, and you know, both Owen and Awesome Training, you know, we have people contacting us looking for neuroaffirming therapists, and I suppose it's just, where do we send them? Which is one of the reasons why we started this course, obviously to meet the needs of autistics too. But you know, there is a huge demand there for it, and it's only going to grow. And I suppose we're in the middle of setting up Awesome Training directory, which would be people who've trained with us, because at least we know they've trained with us and they've done the work. And it is certified, and it's 60 CPD points. It's recognized by the IACP, which is the Irish Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists.
Counselling and Psychotherapy, Irish Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. So that's it's approved by them.
As well. So it's 60 CPD points as well. So put those CPD points to good use, I think, you know. That's it. So if anyone doesn't have if there's no more questions there, Owen, so I suppose we can wrap up now. I just want to say a huge thank you to Owen for joining me tonight and having this chat. I love it.
Great. And it stirs up our thoughts. As I said at the start, it's a learning curve for all of us. So questions and comments are great because they just make us think and think and think and think and just learn more about all of this.
I love it. When I don't agree with someone, it's so good, because it's like, I need to go in and think about this.
Exactly. Why do people not like that?
I don't know. I'm like, we don't have to agree, but now I have something interesting to think about.
Nothing like a good argument.
Exactly. Now that I'm not afraid of them anymore. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for all the that's lovely, very thought-provoking. That's good. We like to provoke thought. Thinking is good. Thank you all for joining us live, and thank you for, I know there's lots of people have signed up for the recording as well. So hopefully we'll see some of you on the course. Again, it's starting on the 21st, I think, of June. Why am I saying June? January. January. So hopefully we'll see some of you there, and everybody else, thank you so much for listening, and do sign up to Eoin's website and on our mailing list and keep in touch with us. Thanks everybody. Thanks so much, Eoin. Cheers everyone.
Great.
Good night.
Great pleasure as
Bye.
always. Enjoyed that.
Always. Thank you.